Now, Tan Sri, you've built Khazanah into a stronger company over the last 13, 14 years. What do you see as the challenges ahead?
I think, first of all, as a sovereign fund managing essentially not just other people's money, but people's money, I think we actually have a very clear dual objective. We need to make money. And I think over that period that you mentioned, 13 over years, we just reported last week that we've grown that about 3.5 times. That translates into a compounded rate of about 9.6% per annum. Secondly, so we also have a certain strategic, mostly developmental objectives in terms of making sure Malaysia moves up the development ladder. We are now a high middle income country. Malaysia just announced 6.2% GDP growth, which we believe is commendable. In fact, last year we celebrated our 60th anniversary as an independent nation. And the average per capita growth over that 60-year period is actually also 6.2%. So Khazanah, thankfully, has been able to both produce a commendable rate of return for an appropriate level of risk and contribute to the national development. And by now, about 45% of our portfolio is actually outside Malaysia with our companies. And this is important as we grow and develop our footprints regionally and globally.
9.6% return, but some reports have suggested that Khazanah could be under pressure to raise
the return.
Are you under pressure?
Well, the returns at 9.6% we believe is more than appropriate against our benchmark. In fact, it has outperformed the benchmarks that we benchmark against because it's a combination of many things. So, for example, our growth portfolio, I think, is growing more like mid-teens, right? But we also have a new developmental portfolio that helps to develop, for example, economic zones in Malaysia, to start new industries, for example, in Malaysia. So that's more longer gestation. So the average is about 9.6. We are a fund that mostly reinvests our gains into new investments.
So fair to say you've revised your strategy?
Not
given the current environment?
Well, the tactical changes are constantly obviously being tweaked, but the overall mandate, the strategic nature and of Khazanah, that has not changed actually, which was always about making money. As I said, it's grown more than 3.5 times, and secondly, in contributing strategic and developmental outcomes. So both has been done.
Do you think you can do better?
The short answer, of course, there are areas, and we are still investing for growth. As you know, a few years ago, global growth, the topic in Davos was around secular stagnation, for example, about growth. This year, obviously, the mood is more upbeat, and clearly there's strong tailwinds. But on top of the overall global growth situation, which has been, I think most forecasts are good, to the point that now we have to watch against complacency. I'm sure you've heard this week. We are also positioned very well in regions in Southeast Asia, for example. Malaysia, as I said, is still growing 6.2%, but also Indonesia, Philippines, in ASEAN. And certainly our proximity, and we have a major investment program in China, in India. These are all growth markets, right? So certainly we're still investing for growth. We are investing in the transformation of our companies. That was a long-term program that created a lot of value. So we've just launched last week what we call Transformation 2.0 for the core Malaysian companies under our stable. Thirdly, we're also seeding, for example, investments in the technology sector. So almost embedded within Khazanah is a sovereign wealth fund, is a sovereign venture fund, if you like. And I think, in China, in San Francisco, in Europe.
Are you confident that we are beyond the new normal, the secular stagnation?
I think this year in Davos, 2018, I believe is the 10th anniversary of the Lehman crisis, and we were here 10 years ago. Certainly the mood has changed, and I think the banks are stronger, financial system are stronger, and I think there is certainly a strong mood. The tailwinds, as mentioned, is strong, to the point that we should be thinking about not being complacent. I think there's been, Mrs. Lagarde has come out to say we should fix the roof while the sun is shining, and certainly we should. And so those kind of work, actually, for us in Asia, we've been doing this actually from the 98 crisis. right? So we spent the last 20 years, actually, and this is also a year of 20th anniversary of the Asian crisis, which is quite far away because we've been building up resilience in terms of risk management, governance. These are much stronger companies, and much stronger economies in many respects. And I think, so in that regard, I think there's a confluence of the global recovery, I think is quite clear. I think there are other issues. So, for example, the issue of inequality is very much on the Davos agenda. And in this regard, I think I've been sharing, and there's a lot of interest, the Malaysian story of how to grow with equity. I think we've done that. Of course, we have issues that I think we're addressing in terms of the various transformation programs.
You talked about governance. Has the 1MDB scandal changed the way you invest or your investment strategy?
I think Malaysia, actually, if you look back from 98 onwards, the change in code of corporate governance, risk management practices, I think has been the whole transformation program that we did for our government-linked companies. I think this has raised the overall standard of governance very clearly. At the recent Minority Shareholder Watchdog Group, so it's an independent award, I think if I'm not mistaken, about 60-70% of the winners of this they're listed companies, but they're also government-linked companies. We're very proud of them. So standards have been raised overall. So I think that directionally, I think that's where it's moving. A
lot of speculation that you may step down in 2019.
I think we've addressed this at our review last week. So I think the long and short of it is I'm on my 14th year, as you mentioned at the start. And like all good companies, actually, we've put in a proper succession program. I think we've announced changes in succession, not just at management, but at board. I think this was a recent announcement. So I'm on record as saying, I certainly don't want to understay. So the job is still ongoing, but we shouldn't overstay.
Has anyone been shortlisted?
We announced a couple of deputy managing directors, like all successful companies, and we believe there's been a track record of success. Internal succession is the preferred route. I think this has been established.
So names like Tengku Zafrul, for instance?
There's all kinds of names that have been floated, but in the end, we've announced internal succession program. So that's out there, it's established. But I made at the point, it's important. Succession is only one part, right? Before succession, you must have success, and I think that success part, hopefully, we've proved to an extent, and we've put a lot of programs inside. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Talk to us about the strategy for the next 10 years.
For the next 10 years, we have our long-range strategies. We think for both Malaysia and Khazanah, our future lies very much embedded within overall development and making investments within the region first. Because we are blessed to be in a geography, as I said, that ASEAN as an investment destination as a whole. China is out there. India is nearby. But we also historically and culturally actually also invested and embedded with the West. So what Khazanah has done is the last 10 years, we've prepared and built a platform. For example, when we are in the US, it's not New York, but it's actually, although we look at things in New York, it's in San Francisco because we see technology and it's a key part of our future, both in terms of investment returns, but also to embed those technological trends into our companies and therefore into our country, right?
Are you likely to raise your foreign investments beyond 46%?
The overall direction is that's been growing by both putting in new investments as well as the rate of return of the foreign investment has actually been slightly higher. Actually, it's in the teens and mid-teens than our domestic investment. Partly because domestic investment, there's a lot of new catalytic developmental type investment plus a lot of restructuring work. So the short answer is yes, we grow, and the exact balance and amount we're constantly rebalancing actually.
We heard from U.S. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin about wanting a weaker dollar. What's your take on that?
I think the various central banks and treasury departments around the world, I believe there's a fairly stable equilibria, if you can use the word, in terms of currency, and I think topical as well is the taxation policy. It should not be a race to the bottom, as it speaks. So I think it all will be quite sensible, and the currency movements of whether the big economies, the US or indeed China and others, I think Malaysia is very clear. We've gone back to the float. And at the end of the day, we know as investors that it must be underpinned by strong fundamentals. Exchange rates may go out of whack against the fundamental for a period of time, but eventually it will get there. So ringgit at 390, I think it's about, we won't actually commit whether that's too high or too low, but we're comfortable. We're comfortable at 390. And US dollar, I'm sure the US will do what is in their interest, but also mindful about what the whole effect of the global economy. Right.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.